All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to our town hall on Black Death and Grief. My name is Elizabeth Joy. I am the director of the Black Community Ambassadors Program who is hosting the event tonight. I just want to take a moment first and thank all of you for joining. Special thanks to policymakers, community leaders, and most importantly, the helpers who are with us tonight. We appreciate all the work that you're doing. You've been doing before COVID, before any of the uh, protests and whatnot, but certainly during and through um, this very difficult time. Real quick before we jump in, just want to give you a little bit of background as to who the Black Community Ambassadors Program is and how we got started. Shortly, you'll see on your screen a little bit about what originally started. It was back in 2019. Myself, Kim Braswell, and a few others were brought together by Dr. Dixon of the ADAMH of Franklin County organization. And we had conversations with each other about Black helpers, about Black wellness. And we thought about those who we've lost in Franklin County and throughout the country to suicide, and those who just are not doing well as a result of the weight they carry. One of the things that Kim did for us was facilitate a focus group on how Black and Brown people feel about traditional healing and help spaces. On your screen, we won't go through every comment, but what we generally heard back from them was that they didn't feel listened to, that the clinicians in counseling or in medical, whatever the field may be, felt a false sense of confidence. They were well-intentioned but ill-prepared. And then generally, they just felt like it was therapy in a box, not customized, or medical services in a box and not customized. Kim, you want to go a little bit further into how that focus group went and what was shared?
Sure. And I think one of the things that's important to note here is what we're talking about is when the people, particularly those of us Black folks who are serving as helpers to other people, we don't always have someone who's checking in on us. And when we go to take care of ourselves, we take the risk of putting ourselves in the care of someone else, whether it's a medical doctor, a counselor, whoever that might be. And what I think is important to know that came from this is that in some cases, we felt like we were, or the voices, I should say, that were in that space felt that they were sometimes in harm's way trying to be taken care of. And that is a really precarious position to be in when you're fragile. You need someone to cater to your needs, your holistic wellness needs. And it's those very spaces where you feel at risk of being further harmed and further traumatized and triggered in the process.
Absolutely. So with that, we moved forward and did a little bit of research just to see what we could find as it relates to Black helpers and how they were doing. And the statistics were rather alarming. So on your screen, you'll see a few of those statistics, specifically about teachers. We found a study where 65% of teachers reported burnout, 43% had loss of sleep, 58% feeling tired all the time, several with shortness of breath, dizziness, heart palpitations. And then we looked at some research for social justice and human rights activists, specifically Black social justice and human rights activists. And they reported heightened symptoms due to racism within the movement and the organizations who they were volunteering with or working with. The research shows, which I know most of you know very well, that culture of martyrdom in which self-care is viewed as self-indulgence. And because of that, it causes those symptoms to increase. We also just found general data for helpers, including emotional and physical exhaustion, anxiety, numbness, high stress levels, headaches, all kind of stuff that just really spoke to their brokenness. And as we know, you cannot serve from an empty vessel. And so as we move forward, we tried to figure out what can we do about this. And so the Black Community Ambassador Support Program was born, and our mission is simple. We feel that if we can help the Black helpers who are helping our community, then we'll realize a healthy community, because those who are helping are influencing the lives of others. And so that's how the Black Community Ambassador Support Program was born. And we want to, again, special thanks to Dr. Dixon and the ADAMH organization who is funding this project. Thanks to all of those who were part of the brains behind it. And the goal for tonight is really just to consider self-care as a strategic move in how we progress the movement that we're all a part of today. So we thank you all for coming, and Kim will let you take it from here.
All right, so you may or may not have noticed that we are in the era of not just COVID-19, but we also have racial unrest across the planet. The world is on fire, I keep saying, in different spaces. So, of course, the way we had originally designed it within our Black Community Ambassadors planning portion was to do this in person. Can't do it in person, social distancing. So we're bringing this to you via this streaming platform. And so we got folks behind the scenes. Shout out to Margot, shout out to Sharonda, and our folks working behind the scenes to make sure this is as streamlined as possible. We are asking those of you who are tuning in through Facebook Live and through YouTube to please make sure that you comment, post your thoughts, questions, concerns, things that have been percolating in your mind. And how we're going to do this is that we're going to have Dr. Ortiz and Elizabeth Joy share some information. I think it's important for us to start from a factual perspective. This is an era where propaganda, paranoia, conspiracy theories, all kinds of things are just taking our minds in all different directions. And to be completely honest, it is not healthy for our holistic wellness to also not have correct information. So we want to get some information from the coroner's perspective on what death is really looking like based on data and stats. And then we want to also take a look at what mental health is looking like here based on what a clinician is seeing versus what we're saying, because everyone thinks that we're masters in all of the things. We're like, listen, I know the insight, I know the information. And in fact, that's why we are professionals, because we don't. So we're going to create space for Dr. Ortiz and for Elizabeth Joy to be subject matter experts in their areas. And then we are going to have dialogue together about what we're seeing in community, how this is impacting us. And then we're going to pull you in on the conversation and see what your thoughts are. We've got some folks hopefully coming from different constituency groups who are categorized in the way that we are defining helpers in the Black community. And we want to hear your voices because this is critically important. And then afterwards, we are going to tell you how we intend on supporting beyond this moment. I think I speak, and I can't really speak for all Black people because it's not like there's a big collective Black people meeting that happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? That doesn't happen. However, I can say that it is important in this moment in time that we are not just having conversations. I think we are exhausted with just having conversations with no action. So the call to action is going to be given at the end of our time together to let you know what other things we're doing to supply help and resources and how we can support each other, how we can embody that spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are collectiveness and feeling like village in this time when we really need each other to thrive and to survive. So with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Ortiz if you can, first of all, welcome to the space. In this era, you're busy. Well, like you're always busy, right? But you're really, really busy now, right? And so I want to honor that you carved out time to find value in this conversation, having this conversation with us. So that's first of all, because you're a whole person and we are in the business of honoring whole people. So we want to honor you as a whole person. And however you'd like to belong to this, you can, but I know you're going to share information with us, but in sharing the context of this information with us, do also, if you feel open and comfortable doing so, share with us too why this is important for you.
So I'll be sharing the statistics in a little bit, I think. But right now, so every day, obviously in my line of work, in my profession, my career, I am faced with death. And I have a very small group of people who work here. We're about close to 45, and all of them are faced with death every day. And it's something that, as the head of the agency, as the coroner, I really think about their mental health constantly. It's a subject that's always on my mind. I've brought people in for my staff to speak to different types of things and activities to keep that mental health positive, because we not only see death, but in more traumatic ways. So what we're faced with every day are homicides and suicides and overdoses. It's an overstimulation, if you will. And personally, it's, for example, today, I had a phone call, and it was on my personal phone, and it was someone that I knew. And she was calling to find out if a loved one of hers was at my facility. And unfortunately, she was. And so I spoke with her about it, but from a personal way, I've had so many phone calls from people that I know who have had their loved ones come here, and it's been just, it's been traumatic. Sometimes it's hard, to come out of that and then go into a work mode, so it affects me every day, and you really have to find different ways of dealing with it in order to keep going and not destroy yourself. So.
And with that, that's part of why too we want to honor you as a whole person. Your job, both of your jobs, are incredibly heavy. And one of the reasons I thought it was important for us to have you on is because I don't know that we always understand exactly what the coroner does. I know it was, for those of you watching out there on Facebook and YouTube land, I know that in preparation for this, I guess I didn't even realize that the coroner's job is to look at unnatural deaths. And in the space of talking about, racism as a health issue and all these kinds of things, it's like that is a whole can of worms that this conversation isn't designed to unpack, but we've got a lot going on right now. And so in that, I want to honor that there's heaviness in the work that you do. And we have gratitude for you being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. And Elizabeth Joy, I didn't know if you wanted to just share a little bit about why you're here, and then we will get into the data.
Yes, thank you so much. And again, thank you, Dr. Ortiz, for joining us. For me, for those who know me, this is my life's work. I care about people. I care about everyone, but I surely care about my brothers and sisters. And as a trauma survivor myself, I have an extensive background in trauma, which includes unfortunately being assaulted by police officers who I happen to be related to. So I know what it's like to have so much trauma that you question being alive. And for me, for a long time, I questioned being alive. And so I spent many years of my life figuring out what healing looks like. And even as a licensed social worker back then, I didn't have those answers, which is crazy because you would think that a counselor would know that. But that's work I had to go do on my own. Because I couldn't stand it anymore. So it was going to be either I got to kill myself or I got to figure out how to be good at life and heal. And so I went on a journey. Some of the many books you see behind me are a collection of, nights and days and literally about 10 years straight, I really just worked on healing. And so as I figured out what works and what has allowed me to show up to life and actually enjoy life in real life, it's my passion to help others do the same. I think that most people think that life has to be so hard that it's mostly not enjoyable, but you're here anyway. But I personally know that you can actually really enjoy life as a lifestyle. And so I'm passionate about teaching individuals that, as well as working with organizations, corporate and nonprofit, on how do we operate in life in a way that honors life, whether we're at work, home, family, or elsewhere. So that's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do.
And thank you so much for that. I can tell you, as a person, I come also from a family that has some trauma, especially as it relates to mental health and mood disorders and, poverty and how all of the stuff, right? All of the stuff we know about the ACEs. We're going to get into some good dialogue about ACEs. And I know that having clinicians in my family's lives saved our family. Absolutely, without a doubt, saved our family. And then even, not letting go of that help, right? But knowing that it's a lifelong journey. There's no destination point. It's just a process. And so as I've experienced workplace trauma and all kinds of other things, I've been so grateful for the mental health community really showing up and wrapping their arms around, I function in organizer spaces. My area of subject matter expertise is trauma-informed social justice. Doing that in and of itself is just like welcoming her, like, come to me, trauma and drama, come this way, right? And so I'm so grateful for clinicians such as yourself who pour into us to keep us well. We will make sure to keep you employed.
Thank you. You know what? I would love to go out of business on the healing side. I would love for the world to be healed and I can go use some of these other brain cells I got. But until then, I'll be here doing what I can to help the world feel better.
Until then, right? With an ellipse, a nice, beautiful ellipse on the end. So Dr. Ortiz, I wanted to start with you and your data because I think yours starts telling us the what. And then Elizabeth Joy's is going to tell us the why. And so I would like to start with you about what you would like to share with us to just give us a framework for when we're talking about death. And let me put this out here too for us to be completely honest, not the two of you because you're already on here, so no, be honest. But like for those of us who are listeners who are somewhere else listening to this, we have to be honest about death. Like I think sometimes we see it glorified, we see it in this pageantry kind of way, or we see one part of it, but not the whole thing. And I think we need to be really honest about what death looks like. And that also means not just thinking about your own mortality, but when we lose people, what happens with them? The people who remain, who are dealing with the death, right? And so I think understanding what these stats really look like, what Black people are really dying from, and where that comes from, I wanted us to have some context to wrap our heads around it, to give some bones to the conversation as we add layers of meat to it. So Dr. Ortiz, teach us, school us.
All right, here come the numbers. I'm the numbers lady. And just for your information, I really hope someone puts me out of business. Really, really hope someday. But why don't I start first on I don't have a slide on the COVID, but I'd like to start first on the COVID numbers. Can you hear me or am I muted here? Okay, cool.
You're good.
So one thing, when you're looking at the statistics at numbers, folks, you have to be very careful because they're not uniform. And you may not find the information that you want. Not everyone is giving the information that you want. So what I've been finding throughout my tenure as coroner is that sometimes it's extremely difficult to find statistics broken down by race and by ethnicity. Not everyone does that. So just going on, starting with that, in terms of the COVID numbers, there is a website out there. It's called COVID Tracker. And what they do is they look at each state's numbers and they do break it down by race and ethnicity. And what they do is also show each state's how well they are in their statistics. So how current they are and if they are breaking it down.
Dr. Ortiz, can I ask a clarifying question really quickly? With that, regarding the COVID, are they counting it by, I saw this on a news program over the weekend, so I wanted to clarify this. Are they counting COVID deaths by the death or by the diagnosis? Do you know?
Well, it has to be diagnosed as COVID to be counted. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So in Ohio, just looking at Ohio, they found that Ohio was reported race data for 91% of cases and 99% of deaths. So in terms of the death data, it's pretty accurate. In terms of the caseload data, they gave it a B. So they grade them all. So they gave Ohio a B. But in terms of numbers, for the African American community here in Ohio, we have 12% of the population are African American. In terms of the cases, 27% of all the cases were African American. So it's not symmetric, obviously, it's higher. And 18% of the deaths were African American. So as you can see, there's more African Americans dying. And then when you look at the Caucasian, the white, Caucasian population in Ohio makes up 82% of the population, makes up 56% of the cases, so much less than the population, right? And 79% of the deaths, so less than their population. Again, not all uniform. So I just took Ohio's and did the race portion. And then why don't we go on? Margot, do you have the slides that you can put on?
Dr. Ortiz, we're having a few technical difficulties in the background. So if you just want to kind of run through from off your top, I think we'll be able to move forward and figure that out shortly.
Okay, sure. So again, in terms of the statistics, looking at in total United States, the top 10 U.S. causes of mortality in African Americans, and we'll just look at the top 5: diseases of the heart, cancer, accidental unintentional injuries. Those are motor vehicle collisions, and those can also be overdoses. So that's number 3. Number 4 was strokes, and 5 was diabetes. Now, if you look at this chart, it includes homicides. So homicides was number 7. However, when you're looking at other charts, I mean, this was difficult to find, but when you're looking at other folks who do the top 10 leading causes of death, many of them do not put in homicides. And I think that doesn't give you the true picture. So what they're putting in is, it's not even natural. I'm not sure why homicides are removed, but in most of the cases, homicides are removed. And the source of this is called Statista, and this is a group that puts together statistics for insurance companies. So it's really important that they have the true whole picture. Next slide, I have Ohio and Franklin County. I'm so sorry that they're tiny, but I'll read them out. So for Ohio, in terms of African Americans, the number 1 is heart disease, number 2 is cancer, 3rd is the accidental unintentional, 4th is stroke, 5th is diabetes. When you look at Franklin County, it's exactly the same, except the first 2 are reversed. So in Franklin County, the number 1 is cancer and number 2 is heart disease. And then the next slide gives you the picture of infant mortality. I think everyone here in Franklin County knows about the problems we've had with infant mortality here in Franklin County. We now have Celebrate One. We have different initiatives looking at that. What they're trying to do is get to the Healthy People 2020 goal of less than 6 per 100,000 deaths. Less than 6 per 100,000 per 1,000 deaths of infants. And what you're going to see in the chart here, and the latest is 2019 numbers, is that for which is difficult to see again. For the Caucasian white population, we have gotten it down to 4.3 babies per 1,000 dying of infant mortality. Average is a 6.9. However, look at the African American, it's up to 11.4. That is a major improvement from previously the high of 17 in 2011, but it is still much higher, close to almost twice what the goal is. And one of the reasons on top you'll see is many of the babies born to African American women are born premature, and that's one of the major causes of infant mortality. So I think there's a lot, a ways to go in improving the infant mortality rate. And then last but not least is our overdose situation. This is just one snapshot of what I put out, but it was kind of telling. We know since COVID, we have had a huge problem with overdoses, especially in April and in May. When I did this slide, it was in mid-May, so we didn't have May numbers. This is looking at April 2019 compared to April 2020 this year. And as you can see, the amount of African Americans dying of overdoses has increased about 85% since last year, compared to the white Caucasian population, which was an increase of 17.9%.
And Dr. Ortiz, can you also share what we're overdosing on in the Black community?
So what we're finding more and more is, number one, fentanyl is in everything these days. So that is an opiate, but it's mixed in cocaine, and the majority of the overdose deaths in the African American community is cocaine related. So most of the time it's a mixture of cocaine with the fentanyl. So, and actually cocaine has increased in usage, and we're seeing it more and more in the overdose deaths just across the board here in Franklin County. And we're seeing an increase in methamphetamine also. And that is my last slide that I have.
Whew.
That is a lot.
I know, wheel down wheel, but that'll give you a background of what's going on nationally and locally.
So it certainly gives us a picture of the what. And a couple of things that I wanted to kind of lift up here too is looking at cancer, heart disease. Those things were like kind of shouting out to me. So what's interesting about that is, and Elizabeth is about to break down a lot of data regarding what the clinicians, see. But I know from some of the research I've done and books I've read and all that good stuff, there's a link between trauma and even those diseases, right? And so even though it shows up one way, in some ways, this is like, not really, but it's like the slow death. It's the slow death. So Elizabeth, can we have you jump in here and share your data with us? And again, thank you so much, Dr. Ortiz, for pulling that data for us, especially, and I want to note here, in case y'all didn't hear what she said, it's not easy to get this data. And I think for me, that's mind-boggling to think, why should it be this hard for even the coroner to find out how we die? Why would there be spaces where the data is not disaggregated, where we would have a better understanding of how to take care of ourselves as Black people, knowing if racism is a health issue, and if we're going through epigenetic trauma, which I know we're going to get into a little bit, we need to know. We've got to know the data so that we can be well and we can thrive, and that we have high quality of life, and that this is a sustainable thing to have high quality of life. So thank you, Dr. Ortiz, for showing us the what. Elizabeth Joy, please school us on the why.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Ortiz, again, for just giving us that data. So I know we have a question that I'll tie in as I share my pieces. We had a question about is it oversimplifying to attribute a majority of these causes of mortality to toxic stress and trauma? I'm going to answer that as I move forward. But again, thank you, Dr. Ortiz. So I'm going to jump into just some things about trauma. Although there's going to be nothing that I share that's super new, I know a lot of people still aren't aware of this information. So if you're already aware of ACEs, then I am excited to hear that, and I encourage you to continue to lean into that data. But for those who don't, I'm just going to give you a quick summary of trauma, as well as some interesting pieces on Black trauma. So the ACE study was done several years ago. It's one of the largest investigations of childhood trauma and neglect. Over 17,000 people were asked about both their childhood experiences as well as their current health status. It's a simple questionnaire. You guys can go out online and just Google ACE study if you want to take your see what your score is. But there's 10 questions in these 3 categories of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So stuff like, were you abused physically, emotionally, or sexually as a child? Were you neglected physically or sexually or emotionally? And then as far as what your household was like, did someone in your household have mental illness? Did you have a relative that was incarcerated? Did you have a relative that used substances in your house? Did you witness your mother treated violently? And or did you have parents who experienced divorce, which we know divorce rates across the world, most of us probably have that one, at least one checked, right? So the ACE study goes in and asks these questions, and then this is what the results is. 64% of those 17,000 people had at least one or more of those things as a childhood experience. 38% had 2 or more. And what's most important to know about this, first of all, well, those are big numbers. But secondly, it should be noted that the primary folks who participated in the study were Caucasians who were middle class, educated folks. So this is not data that even accounts for race or any of the things that we're talking about today as it relates to Black folks. So if we're seeing this kind of data with folks who don't have that overlap of racism, who's to say what these numbers are? So the implications of the study are simple. The more you have of those experiences that I went over, the more likely you are to have social conditions, disrupted neural development, social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Then you adopt health risk behavior, then you get disease, and then you're likely to have early death. These are just a few of the implications as far as diagnoses or life challenges that folks who have high ACEs encounter. Alcoholism and drug abuse, depression, liver disease, financial stress, suicide attempts, risk for sexual violence, the list goes on and on. I think there are some other studies out there that have been done on Black folks, but this was the original study. So just showing you this to say, trauma impacts us to the question of whether or not these are the things that may show up in the statistics that Dr. Ortiz showed. We don't know for sure, but I can tell you for myself as a clinician, you know, I've had recently, a few years ago, a client pass away from heart failure, but she really died from sexual abuse because she ate herself to death. And so you're never going to see that on her death certificate, and the coroner's probably going to never know her story. But that's what I know because I'm on this side of the fence as it relates to helping folks. So then moving forward and thinking about African Americans and trauma, for those of you who have not heard of this book, hopefully you can engage in this and read it soon. The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. There's just a quote from the book that I felt is important to just read out. And it says that the slave society prepared the young to accept exploitation and abuse, to ignore the absence of dignity and respect for themselves as Blacks. The social, emotional, and psychological price of this adjustment is well known. So what she goes on in the book to say is that ultimately this diagnosis, or unofficial diagnosis, if you will, of post-traumatic slave syndrome really results from multi-generational trauma, from centuries of slavery and continued institutionalized racism. And added to that is our belief, real or imagined, that the benefits of society are not something that we have access to. So she goes on in the book to state that this really shows itself in three ways. And as we move into the discussion here, this will come up. So the vacant esteem, which is our esteem is our beliefs about our value to our families, our friends, the community, and the world at large. And obviously, when there's disparaging identities being promoted upon us, then that can shift us into experiencing vacant esteem or low esteem. Ever-present anger, I think most of us can speak to that just as of the last few weeks, right? So so anger is a natural emotional response to a blocked goal or fear of failure. But right now, for us Black folks, we're angry about the violence we see, and we're experiencing the degradation of our people, the humiliation, the marginalization, the misrepresentation, and the lack of access. So we've been doing these support groups regularly, and we're hearing so much about folks just being angry all the time. So we're just, even before COVID and all that's happening now, this is stuff that has been part of our lives as Black folks every day, just because of who we are, especially here in America. And then lastly is the racist socialization, in which we adopt the slave master's value system, belief that all things that are white are superior, and things that are not associated with whiteness or are associated with Blackness are therefore inferior. And then we begin to look at ourselves and our community through white eyes, and we mold ourselves to accommodate white prejudice and adopt their standards. And then the last study I want to show you guys is just a study done on neurobiology of PTSD in Holocaust survivors and their children. And what the study found was that the children of these Holocaust survivors were born with low cortisol levels, and that's the stress hormone that helps us regulate our bodies. And what the study basically showed was that children whose parents had PTSD were 3 times more likely to have it themselves. And then we also know that 50 to 70% of those with PTSD also meet the criteria for major depression or another mood or anxiety disorder. So this is just a big story of trauma, both historical trauma, genetic trauma, biological trauma. And then this is how it shows up for us. And I always try to show this to people, because my fear, and this is why we're here promoting self-care as an act of resistance, is that different than a physical wound, you cannot see trauma. Trauma is a hidden wound. And so this is the best I can do to show you what trauma looks like. So on the left, you see a healthy brain, and on the right, you see an abused brain. No need to get really technical. Dr. Ortiz could probably do a better job of laying out this slide than I can, because I do not have a medical background, but I think we can all simply look at this and know that there's a difference between the brain on the left and the brain on the right. And so this is what we need to understand when we talk about the childhood experiences that we've had. We talk about just being Black in America. Then you add the stressors of being scared to die because of the pandemic that directly disproportionately affects us. And then you add all of the issues and the tension that we're having around race and cries out for justice. Imagine what your brain looks like as we're trying to process it. And this is why we're stressing the importance of taking care of ourselves. So hopefully this sets the stage for us to just think through and be considerate of trauma as we're moving forward in our conversation tonight.
Thank you so much for breaking that down. This is why I love y'all. Just brilliant people, right? So one of the things, well, 3 things that I want to lift up. There were some really awesome things mentioned in the chat. There was mention about Dr. Roy Wade's Urban ACEs study. When Elizabeth was talking about ACEs and saying that about 64% of that original population of 17,000 that was predominantly white, middle class, it was backed by Kaiser Permanente. They all had insurance and everything, right? So if the majority of that group had one, and they were predominantly white, what we later find out is that on average in the Black community, the average ACE is a 5. The tipping point is 4 or more, right? There's data that suggests that if your ACE is at a 4 or more, you are at risk of, and please understand, this is at risk of, not certain of, you're at risk of dying 20 years before the average person with no ACE. That is huge. If the tipping point is 4 or more. 4 or more, you're at risk of dying 20 years before the average person. So what does that mean if the average ACE for the Black community is a 5? It's a 5, right? And this means that we are manifesting this trauma in our bodies. So what we want to call out here, especially when we're having a conversation about Black death and Black grief, is that we are somatically experiencing our traumas. It is happening in our body. So want to lift up Dr. Roy Wade's Urban ACEs study. We also want to give a shout out, it was mentioned in our comments too, about the book written, The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She's the first Black, I think she is I can't remember her title, is in California. And what she did was she actually incorporated the ACE study in how she treated her patients. Mm-hmm. So when you're coming in here, I'm not just going to look at your medical records, but I'm also going to give you this ACE screening to make sure we're not missing something. And it was brilliant to be able to do that, because just as Elizabeth pointed out, when we don't know your trauma story, we miss things. We must know those things so we know how to take better care of ourselves. I wanted to note there's a question in the chat before we transition. How do we balance self-care and activism beyond the self, in and out of the community? And it's by one of our really dope people in community, Ms. Tiffany Kendrick. So I don't know if y'all wanted to take a stab at this. I can go for it with a response to this question.
Go ahead, Tim, and I'll follow you. If I doubt you'll miss anything, but I'll gladly follow if you do.
So I will tell you that one of the things that we've been seeing over a number of years, and this is anecdotal, right, is a tremendous amount of stress regarding those. Let me even back up. We need to know that a lot of people who feel that they are called to do advocacy, activism, organizing, many of them have trauma stories. And many of them felt like they were called to serve because they themselves went through something traumatic. So they wanted to.
Real quick, Kim, let me just add that that's the case for behavioral health workers as well.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm. And so people end up going into this work because they want to help because of something that they experienced. Mm-hmm. So let's lift up right now that service is not self-care. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Service is not self-care. You can go help all the people on the planet. It does not mean it's going to make you better. It means that you're exhausted. And then once you're done fighting the whole world and the revolution and the power and helping everybody get well, often what is the case is then the folks get home, and when they're quiet, their stuff creeps up.
Yeah.
So you have to take care of yourself in the process. And so that's one thing, is not using the work to get better. You got to go and you actually have to do the work.
Which is actually avoidance. Let's just be honest. And we see a lot where folks are staying busy, keeping music on, always having stuff going on so that they don't have to sit down with themselves for any one moment. And to add to your point, Kim, on the clinician side, when you look on behavioral health counselors and social workers, not only have folks been inspired to join the field because of their history of trauma oftentimes, but generally speaking, and there's some shift as of recent years. I know I only look 21, but I've been in the game for a really long time. And they definitely weren't teaching us back when I went to school. They taught us not to talk about ourselves. We never even talked about ourselves in all of schooling. And so, I mean, even today, a lot of clinicians really don't know trauma, and they definitely don't know their own trauma. They haven't healed themselves. And so what I know is that they're out here feeling better by helping someone. And there is such thing as a helper's high, in that, you know,
that's actually a real thing. Can we just say, like, you do get a serotonin boost, technically?
Yes. And there's nothing wrong with that. But where's that line between I'm giving out of the kindness of my heart and it feels good to almost an addiction? Because I've come across people, especially in our support groups that we're facilitating. Mondays, we have the men's group, and then Tuesdays, we have an organizers group in the day, and then a general group in the evening for Black helpers. And, you know, folks are just, this is what they do. They feel like there's nothing else they should be doing. And just to ask them the question, how are you doing? They don't have that answer.
Can't answer it.
They don't have the answer because they're always focused externally. And so that's one of the challenges we're seeing. And so to answer your question, Tiffany, there's no exact answer to it. But what I do know, and this is why I say self-care is resistance, is that we have a better movement when each Black individual is better, right? So I challenge people to prioritize yourself, which again, we feel like is selfish. But when you prioritize yourself, you're a better clinician, you're a better organizer, you're a better mom, you're a better wife, you're a better whatever role, that partner, whatever role you have, you're better. So the balance, it really requires a shift in belief system. And I think that's why it's so hard for people, because it seems counterintuitive that putting myself first is going to help our community. But again, I think when you look at the movement for Black folks, are we not seeking wellness? Like, this whole movement is that we want to be well, we want to do well, we want to feel well. And while there are external influences that prevent us from being able to have access in certain ways, there's a whole lot we're not doing for ourselves in the meantime. And that's why we stress so much about the internal locus of control and thinking about what can we do, right? While we're trying to figure out how we can influence systems and organizations and policy. But in the meantime, we have to take care of ourselves.
So I want to bring up a question, and I'm actually going to ask for it to belong to both of you in a little bit of a different kind of way. So hang with me on this one for a second. I want to bring up the space of loss. And what does that look like? I know the title of this topic was death and grief, but part of grief is loss, is losing, losing something that we cared about, whether it's a person, a job, our health, our status, those kinds of things. Dr. Ortiz, I would like for you to share a little bit about, because I don't think we think about this. Like, we think about the death, but we don't think about the people who remain, who are grieving the people who we lose. So I would like for you to just share a little bit about what you see regarding how we are responding to loss, what you see from the coroner's office. And then Elizabeth, if you could speak to kind of what it looks like as we're processing the loss, especially whatever emotions we're seeing, how are we responding to it? And then with that, I would really like for us to, because I think when we get into a space of talking about trauma, it is critically important that we also use the R word, which is resilience. Hurt people, but healed people heal people, right? And so we have to talk about resilience. So can we talk a little bit, Dr. Ortiz, about what those of us who are in loss, what we kind of look like in your office, in your space? Elizabeth, what loss looks like in your space? And then how do we get to that point of resilience? We can start with you, Dr. Ortiz.
Sure. So in my agency, in my office, we get calls every day, either calls or visits from family members. And remember, my office does not deal with what we call natural deaths. So the deaths we're talking about here are people who have died of homicides, suicides, overdoses. Those are the major circumstances that families come in for, and or call on the phone. And we see a lot of anger. And my staff is trained to really listen and try and help in any way they can, but understand the anger is a form of their grief. And many times, folks don't understand. This is today, I think it was a 20-year-old, my 20-year-old daughter or son, just got killed by a bullet, out of the blue, and they're angry. How could this happen? How does this happen? So we see a lot of that. And then the other is we have family that call and they feel so guilty about the death of their loved one. A lot of times that's due to overdoses or suicides, because maybe they didn't do enough to prevent, so we see both of those. The majority of times is either anger, or we see that guilt, and it takes the form of just, they call and they start talking and talking and talking, and they want to talk about their loved one and the life, and the reasons why they thought they were at fault, that the family was at fault, or this person was at fault for the death. So those are, a lot of what we see coming through here. Really difficult emotions to deal with.
Certainly. So then let's say hypothetically, if the world were perfect, well, more perfect, a more perfect union, right? And so we were able to say, hey, listen, I know this is a lot for you. Maybe you should seek some counseling. And then if the world were really awesome, they'd be like, yes. And we're going to send them over to someone such as, for example, Elizabeth Joy. So then our angry folks get into your office, Elizabeth Joy. And then what's really going on?
Yeah. So, in my work, and I think it depends on, and I do very little direct service anymore. I'm wearing some other hats, but over the years of being a clinician, outside of being in a specific space where people are coming to in crisis, what I see more than anything is that folks come for help later. People are coming to counseling years later. So that trauma, they're angry, they're sad, they're whatever they are, and they typically are adopting some sort of coping mechanism off the top because it's a crisis situation. And so they are, when you're in that crisis, that brain isn't working the same. And so we're trying to figure out what's the now thing I can do. And it's not to be searching for a counselor that you don't already have and thinking through. That'd be like trying to buy a car in the middle of a crisis. Like, it's just not what you do. Unless shopping is a coping mechanism, and then maybe. But generally speaking, what we see is that folks come later. So people have loss, people have grief, people have all of these things that happen from life experiences, whether it's the death of a loved one, of a divorce, childhood issues, and they don't do anything about it typically right away. What happens is they let it sit and they cope. So that's either shutting down. It could be that they get aggressive and then they end up in jail and then they get mandated for counseling. Or they shop, or they gossip, or they start being really mean to people, or they're overly caring and they're just everyone's friend.
Or cocaine and fentanyl.
Yeah, or using, right? So there's all these different things people do. And then typically they're not coming to counseling until their whole life is falling apart because they haven't addressed that trauma, or the way that they addressed it eventually becomes too much. So in my book, You Survive Now What, I talk about the 6-stage model for healing. And so stage 1 is survivor, stage 2 is depriver, and that's depriving yourself of life knowingly or unknowingly. And so what I teach people is that typically this trauma happens, you're feeling some kind of way, and you implement this coping mechanism, oftentimes not a positive or healthy one. And then it works in the moment to shut down. It works in the moment to lean back a little bit, maybe have some wine at night. But then next thing you know, 10 years later, the little wine at night turned to 10 glasses every day, or a little anger now turned into just going ham all the time, or a little quiet now turns into complete shutdown of the world. And it's not until a whole bunch of other bad things keep happening that then they show up for counseling. So, one of the things we want to encourage people to do is to start being way more proactive about reaching out, so that we're not getting into that space. So there was a question earlier about how do we take care of ourselves, and that's something that we've talked in the support groups a lot, because self-care is kind of this thing where it's like, oh, I got to go get my nails done to do self-care. I have to go spend money. I have to go make this big day, spa day, this and that. But self-care for some folks is just that you got up and brushed your teeth today. Like, that's self-care, because we come across folks who discontinue hygiene because their trauma has sat in them and festered for so long that they're not caring for themselves in that way. Self-care is just stepping away from the computer for a minute. Self-care is knowing that this event is happening and it's for our people, but I'm gonna sit this one out, and I know my people are gonna show up and show out. So self-care has to be something that you're doing regularly, and it's simple stuff, and you got to find out what that means for you. We're teaching folks just to lean into nature, simple things. put your feet in the grass, go look at the clouds, right? Breathing, that's a whole thing. Like I've shown the people in group, like my little watch from my Garmin watch, where my stress levels are high. And as soon as I start breathing, I can see the data. It goes down like immediately. So breathing is, I think, the most simple way you can just take care of yourself and check down. But what I find for self-care and trauma and just people struggling is that, people want to do better. They want to be better. But pushing themselves to take some steps is another matter. So people are always showing up saying, teach me more self-care. And I'm saying, I'm like, y'all, I've been training clinicians for years. I don't got nothing new to tell y'all. Like, it's basic and it's simple. And then you build up from there. So that's how I'm seeing grief. And the other piece on the anger stuff is that folks are either angry and staying in that state and not able to see which part of that is actually sadness. Or they're just like, you know what, I'm cool. It is what it is. This is how life is. This is what it is, And so, again, just staying stuck in that space.
So you said something that, well, yes, absolutely. Jump in. Yes. It's like double dutch.
Really quick on self-care. Just a little bit about myself. I was a single parent for a very long time, and practicing physician. I was a pediatrician before I did this, and I worked for Children's Hospital.
Wait a minute, Dr. Ortiz, I have to stop you so that we can lift this up to give people perspective. Listen to this, people. The coroner was a pediatrician and a single parent mom. Do you know what you just said there? Because I just want to honor this. You have treated life and death.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't even mean to interrupt you. I just needed that noted because I think that is a pretty humongous thing, and it would be too easy to graze over that. I'm putting myself back on mute. Please share. Say more.
So my whole being in life, I grew up in the South Bronx, right? I grew up in a single parent household. Dad was an alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. And so I had like the worst care. So medical care. So I went, my whole mission is work with underserved. So that's what I've done for over 25, 28 years. And then I went on to do this. During my time as a pediatrician, I worked with underserved communities for clinics, etc. And I saw abused children whose parents would literally leave them in my clinic and walk away. Kids whose parents were psychotic right there in the clinic, and we had to get them away from the parent and get the parent help. Kids who wanted to die and had tried. Kids who were pregnant and afraid to tell their parent. I had to tell the parent, So all of this, and then on top of that, I had 3 children, 2 twins. I had a pair, twins and a daughter, and it got to the point where I didn't know, how I was feeling. I didn't know what was going on with myself, and I didn't know if I could go on. It got to the point where I wasn't sure I wanted to go to work. I didn't want my kids. I just wanted to just stay still, just stop, because I would work. And then the kids, and do things with the kids and do things for work. And there was nothing, there wasn't me. And so at one point, and this is how I've dealt with it ever since. At one point it was, let me stop. And what is going on with me right now? Take, we're talking about census. Well, take a census of yourself. It's like, what am I feeling right now? Is this sadness? Is this anxiety? Do I want to die? And to be honest, there was a point where that came up, I didn't want to go on. And, so it was kind of taking that census of myself and trying to go backwards and say to myself, well, then why do I feel angry? Or why do I feel sad? What happened that's making me feel this way? And then backwards and backwards and backwards. And sometimes I wrote this stuff down. Sometimes I just kept it in my head. But it kind of, after a while, it de-stressed you because you then were able to verbalize what the heck was going on, why you were feeling the way you were feeling. And then you can start thinking about, well, then how can, I can't get rid of my kids and I need my job. So how can I go on from here? And so my answers were kind of taking that grounding, I think, just grounding yourself down and starting to think about what it is you're feeling, and then working backwards as to what was causing that feeling, and then working on ways to live, make it a little bit easier, every day. For me, it ended up being yoga. I started taking yoga about 50 times a week, but that's what did it for me. But, for everyone, it's a different story. And it depends on, how much you can afford. They're not cheap. So, but anyway, that's my little soapbox.
Yeah, no, and thank you so much for saying. I think it's important for us to humanize helpers, right? Like part of the work that we're doing as a Black Community Ambassador Support Program is supposed to be targeting like, hey, Black helpers, this is a lot. You do a lot. You're carrying a lot. Are you okay? Is your reservoir empty? Has anyone checked in on you? Because I know you've probably checked in on 1,000 people. Has anyone checked in on, have you checked in on yourself? Are you making a priority to make sure that you are well so that you can pour into other people? Elizabeth Joy, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that before I kind of segue us.
Yes, I just want to add, I know that we had a question about grief, how grief differs from or is related to racially induced trauma and other forms of emotional pressure. So the one thing I want to point out on that, I think we've covered most of it. But, what I'm seeing is that folks showed up to the COVID pandemic, and then the race pandemic already broken and unhealed, right? From their history of trauma and or their history of being Black, right? And so this is a tough time when you're in the middle of crisis. It's really hard to like start working on healing when you got a live wound that's bleeding as you speak, right? And so that's what I'm seeing in the conversations I'm having and the folks that are sharing in the groups. And so, when I looked at for myself, when all of this hit and I'm listening to other people's pain, and it's not that I haven't had some moments, because I have, but I've generally been able to keep myself grounded and stay joyous as I try to show up to life. But the difference has been, though, that I did the work so that when this experience came up, and there are other things that have happened in my most recent life, and now as I've worked on that healing, that long list of trauma that was sitting in there, when new things happen, they don't take over my entire world the way they used to. So as it relates to how they're connected, I think they're certainly connected. And I think when you have grief and other trauma, and then you have an environment where we're seeing Black people killed and we're seeing white people be very insensitive about what they're talking about and how they're responding, those are just triggers, right? That just continue to sort of poke at that wound that hasn't yet healed. And so that's the challenge. And that's why we have to really work on healing as a lifestyle, so that, because we know life's going to keep happening all the way until the end. You're going to have some hard times here and there. That's just the way it is. But when we can be more proactive in that effort, then we can show up to difficult times with these techniques that we've learned already in place, and then we can go to those quickly. The last thing I wanted to add, because we're talking about people being sad and we're talking about the heavy side, but there's a different side that you can see how trauma shows up as well. And how it can show up is people who obsess with success or whatever they think that looks like. For me, some of my childhood trauma led me to getting a lot of degrees, being a perfectionist, always being on point, always having to be dressed to the nines, like always being tight. And I think sometimes we don't talk about, when we talk about grief, sometimes people are grieving by looking like they're not grieving, right? And so I think it's important to point out, because just even on our calls, like we're looking at people's faces and they look fine. And then we do our check-in and people are like, I feel like trash. I'm on the edge, but you can't see it on their face, right?
They look fantastic.
Yes. So I think that's another way we're coping a lot of times, is by presenting ourselves as fine and aspiring to all these great things, which again just gives us an opportunity to distract ourselves from what's really going on the inside.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to put some good news out here. And by the way, family and friends tuning in there, this actually is good news because it helps to get you informed. Here's some good news too. So one of the experts on trauma and resilience, there's this book that came out that people were like, oh my God, this explains my whole life, is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And one of the things he talks about in this book is how a lot of the trauma that we process, we're experiencing it somatically. So we think we're good here, but then your body's messed up. You got that headache that you can't get rid of. You got stomach issues. You can't digest your food. You got your hip aches and you're not really sure why. And why do I have sciatica now? Or, I've got eczema, or why is my skin acting up? And it's your body screaming like you're not okay, right? So here's the fantastic news, especially as it relates to Black people, Black and brown people, but I'm going to highlight, of course, Black people today because of what's going on. What they're realizing, and this is empirical research, friends. So for those of you who are like, is that just things that Black people say because it's almost Juneteenth? And it's like, while it might be, it's also true. What empirical research is showing by people who have no reason to uplift Black and brown people in theory, right, is, I sat in a 2-3 day training with him maybe last year or so. And he sat there and he said, listen, the secret to resilience is stuff that people who are Black and brown have known all along. Yoga, running, drumming, chanting, singing, all of the things that you do that are celebratory things. That's how we get well. So let me tell you why this is also critically important. Because right now there is so much heaviness going on in the Black community that we're not comfortable celebrating right now. We're not comfortable being joyful right now because we think it's so heavy that somehow I have sold out against the revolution because I smiled or I laughed or I danced or I sang or I hummed. I felt soulful. I used my body in this kind of way that normally makes me feel good, but somehow that sold out. No, it didn't sell out. That's how we're well. That's how we get well. That's how we stay well. And empirical research is even pointing to this. Capoeira and things like this. This is what we do. We've always known to do this. And what the research showed is we didn't voluntarily come here, right? There's that. But we got here and other forms of wellness were pushed on us that didn't always agree with us culturally. And that brings us all the way back to where Elizabeth Joy started us in the conversation. We're being given methods to be well that didn't look like us. They weren't culturally competent. They weren't culturally responsive and affirming. They didn't show cultural humility about who we are and that we know our bodies. We know our culture. We know how to be well. Go back to the healthy versions of what you know, what we know about us. We know how to be well. It's about practicing it. And I want to uplift something that Elizabeth Joy said as we get ready to wrap up. I love that you said, this is not new. Okay, been doing this a long time. The info didn't change. The list hasn't changed. What we have to do, friends and family, is do the work. Like if I need to probably eat better because when I eat trash, I feel like trash, then why are you still eating that? If you know that when you drink, it doesn't work out for you the next day, fam, stop it, right? If you know I don't like it, but I feel better when I work out, and there's research that shows it's a release. We need a release. Then it's what we have to do. And it should also be noted that for some people, we know the ACE study looks at things that happen by or before your 18th birthday. That also means that we have traumas that kind of stacked up beyond the 18th birthday. it doesn't absolve those, right? It means that if I have ACE and then I have this other stuff, it compounds. That means it might take more for me to be well.
So Kim, let me just add this in, because this is ain't nobody gonna admit to this, because it's not something that you would probably want to admit to. But one of the things that I think folks struggle with is the victim mentality. And so here's the thing about getting well. You cannot get well and maintain your crown as the victim of whatever your stuff was. And so here's what I mean. That shows up like being able to be the one that says, yeah, I'm the one, I'm the black sheep of my family, and ain't nobody never cared about me. Or, yeah, it seemed like every time I work somewhere, they do this and they do that. Or, you know, or even when you think about the race relations right now, people feeling like that if they don't speak from a place of hurt, then somehow they don't, the message isn't as powerful, right? So there's this really interesting low-key relationship sometimes that we have with being a victim that we have to be willing to break up with. And Eckhart Tolle talks in his book about the pain body. Honey, listen, childrens. If y'all
changed my whole life, that'll make you snatch your whole face up. Right?
Yes, go on and get that new earth and get y'all's lives. But he talks about the pain body in his book, and essentially it's this energy center, and it's really funky, and it's like a parasite, and it always needs to eat. And so when you have your individual pain body, and we've got collective pain bodies. So you've got your stuff, all the stuff you've ever been through in life. Then you got the female pain body. That's all the childbirths that ever happened, all the rapes and violence against women, right? You got the male pain body. You got the US pain body. Like, so there's all these different things, and they start to collect within themselves, within you. And again, they're like parasites that need to eat. So what happens is you might be having a good old day, and then all of a sudden you flip and you snap, and somebody barely even does anything, and then all of a sudden you like feeling some kind of way and feeling snappy. You don't even know where it came from. Well, that's your pain body, and it's a thing that lives in you. And when we don't learn what that is, and then learn how to starve it so they can sit over here dormant, what ends up happening is your pain body will go attract somebody else who got a really heavy pain body, so we can get fed. So literally, he talks about how one person with a heavy pain body and another person end up getting into a car accident because their energies are literally seeking other negative energy to connect with. And so as it relates to the whole self-care conversation, to be honest, and those of y'all who know me know that's all I really know how to do. I love you, but we got to keep it real. We got folks who are not really ready to give up that drama and the crown of victim that it requires in order for you to be better. So that's something you're going to have to make a choice about, so that you can be well. So we can't keep being in the space of all the drama and be well, right? So I just want to point that out, because I think that's something people really struggle with. And so we've given you the tools a million times and you're not using them because deep down you want to be well, but you really don't want to give up some of that stuff that comes with being a victim. So it's just important. Yes, healing is a choice, and it's a choice you have to make not only every day, but multiple times a day. And Kim is
I'm directing traffic at my house. Ignore me. I'm right here with you. I'm right here with you. No, I've got puppies and family and all of the things, but I'm here and I am present. I'm present. So we have 15 minutes left. And I want to, as we're kind of bringing stuff to a close, I want to make sure that I create enough space, and I don't want to rush through this. I want us to start thinking about what the next right thing is in our spaces, right? What do we need to know? What do we want to share with others to think about this? And this takes me back to what Dr. Ortiz was talking about that's happening in our office, right? This would mean when I'm kind of connecting your two worlds, I'm thinking about how many emotions we skipped over before we got to anger. how the journey toward healing, we miss the train to get on if we don't decide when I'm feeling anger and when I'm feeling loss in this moment, right? Loss of all kinds, right? Whether it's the human being, the job, health conditions. I know for some people, when they have debilitating health conditions, I lost the ability to use my body the way I wanted to, right? Whatever that is. Then we also have the ability to jump on that train to get well if we take it, or if we decide to just commit and double down on the anger. And I can't tell you, and I know you both know this from the work you do, how frequently I hear people when we ask them, how are you? I'm angry. I feel enraged. I want to burn something up. And I'm always wondering, what all did you miss before that? Number one. And then number two, if that's what you commit to, generationally, what am I passing on? I'm passing on all of my epigenetic trauma that I got from anger and from the heaviness onto my babies. They have to have something better than what I've got, right? And so what are the next steps for us to be well? You know, Dr. Ortiz, based on, and now you should have never told me you were a pediatrician, because now I know you've got this whole other lens. You should never tell me that. So now I would really like both of your perspectives, Dr. Ortiz, about like, how do we avoid ourselves and people we love ending up in your office, you know, for this death that was not natural. So that, and then Elizabeth Joy, I'm going to go ahead and put it out here, Dr. Elizabeth Joy, because that's coming. That's about to be, right? I would like for you to share, what do we do so that we, number one, come to a clinician, right? That's first. That we don't wait so long that you have to fix 17 problems instead of 3, because everybody's copay is set up a certain way where, you know what I'm saying, right? And so how do we do this so we utilize you in the right way, and so that we can be well, and so that we can stay well, and so that our wellness can be contagious? Dr. Ortiz, I'll start with you. Leave her alone, universe. Let her unmute.
Sorry. I had to switch locations there for a minute. I got lost. Anyway, so I think we need to, some of what we need to do is get better information. You know, you had said it in the beginning. We really need to get more uniform information that includes race and ethnicity in it. And so by getting that information, we know what people are dying from, which people are dying from what. And so therefore, knowing that, we can do prevention, right? To prevent these deaths. When you're looking at the prevention, the other aspect of that is, and this is something that I found, you know, I think everyone knows I work a lot with addiction and overdoses, et cetera, but something that I found a great deal of is that there really isn't much in the realm of culturally sensitive, or, you know, treatments, groups, research, basically research, even research on different groups. Most of the research, for example, women in addiction, all the research for treatment has been done on white males. What does that tell you? I mean, why, you know, and we have at least 22% of those who die of overdoses are females or women, and it hasn't changed. It hasn't gotten any better. And that's because we just don't have the research. We don't have the treatment methodology, or, you know, different ways of treating women and women of color in addiction. So I think we really need to get that uniform statistics. And in terms of treatment, we need to get more research with folks of color, looking at folks of color and being more specific. So
thank you for that. And what does that mean on a very granular level, friends? please take the census. Because right now, if you haven't taken the census, you don't exist. What does that mean? That means 10 years from now, when there's research that's going to certain pots that require money for you, your body's not counted in there. Our numbers are not accurate. So be counted. And that means when you have things like support groups, hint, hint, Elizabeth Joy, that means you register for it, you know, so that you're counted, so that we know what your stories are, so that when we go and we advocate for you, so that you don't have to, like, however we can support you, your story is counted. Elizabeth Joy, what's next?
So before I go into stuff specifically about counselor, let me just say this. Healing is hard. It's really hard. As a person who, for me, I had a good life externally, had money, was making 6 figures, doing my thing, but I had those flashes where I knew I was feeling some kind of way. You come back from a party and then you just cry all night, right? Or you kind of almost like see yourself in the mirror as you're walking by, and I'm ugly on the inside, like, and I can see it. But there will be times that I would try to lean into that healing, and it would hurt so bad that I couldn't make the move yet. So let me just honor the fact that healing is hard. Okay. So if you're like, oh, I tried, yeah, it's hard. And so until the pain of change is no longer greater than the pain of being the same, then you're kind of stuck. And some of that you just don't control, because just sometimes the stars just got to align, and you got to get that feeling in you. So let me just say that. And change is hard. Healing is change, right? And so I talk in my book about change challenges, and here are a few of the reasons why folks don't lean in. And so these are the things we need to address so that we can get there. One, you have to think that you're worth it and believe that you're worth it. And for many of us, we grew up in households where we were told we wasn't nothing, we wasn't gonna be nothing, whatever, or your husband told you that, or your wife told you that, or whatever. Number two, you have to believe that your new life that you're embarking upon will be worth the pain of change, because again, change is painful, because you're going to have to look at all the stuff that happened to you and process it all the way through so you can accept it, sit it down and let it go in order to move forward. So you got to believe that there is a better life that's worth that pain you're going to have to go through by digging in that closet and getting that stuff out that you hid from yourself all this time. Thirdly, we have to understand that, or get past the fact that change, we're moving into the unknown. Anytime you're shifting into a new world, it's unknown. So even if it's better, it's unknown and it's uncomfortable. And so what I would encourage you to do is be worried about the known rather than the unknown. It's the fear of the unknown that gets us stuck. But what we think we know is really where we often get stuck. And then you have to believe that you're capable of changing. And I think a lot of people don't think they are, but I know I show up to this session cleaned up and healed. But if any of y'all who know me from way back, honey, it didn't look like it was possible at the time. So if I can do it, I know that you can. So let's just keep that in mind. And then lastly, to wrap up, let me just give you all some feedback from a clinician's perspective. I'm gonna put this up on the screen. Just a couple of things to consider. First of all, if you're looking for a counselor, we're working on building that up on our site, but we got work to do. But in the meantime, Psychology Today exists, psychologytoday.com, and you can go on there and put where you're at, the ethnicity that they serve. You can search by that, area of focus, location, gender, age, insurance, all that is there. I know we've got some clinicians on here in Columbus. Shantae Meadows is on. Thank you, Shantae, for coming through. So it's some Black counselors out there. So we can't say that we can't find somebody that look like us, because that's not true. We out here. Okay. So first of all, please consider going to counseling. Secondly, let's just so you understand what happens. As clinicians, most folks are taking insurance. So we got a whole lot of red tape we're working around trying to get to you. So just know, first session is usually assessment. Second is treatment plan. It feels kind of robotic, but that's the way they make us do it with insurance. This is going to take time. We got to build rapport, but your openness is necessary. If you come in counseling and you barely tell us anything, we can barely help you. And we give you feedback on what you tell us. We don't read minds. So everything you say and share with us is how we decide what we're going to suggest that you do or don't do. So just understand that. As you're in counseling, best practices, your counselor should be client-centered. They should be moving at your pace and talking about what you want to talk about. If they're not, you need a different counselor, because the counseling is all about you, not us as therapists. So you get to choose how we roll. They should be strengths-based. You're going to work on your challenges, but they should always be reminding you of what you're good at. Lastly, we do have code of ethics we have to abide by. So please don't feel some kind of way if we don't lean into the relationship as much as you want, or we say no to your gifts, or we don't answer your call.
Or you won't be my Facebook friend.
Yeah, like this stuff we're not allowed to do, y'all. It's not because we don't love you. So just know that there's some issues there. But lastly, make sure you're comfortable. If you're not feeling it, discontinue. Please seek another provider, though. Don't think just because you had a bad experience that that's all counselors and all counseling, because there's a lot of great clinicians out here, but you got to do the work and seek it out. So that's my suggestions for just thinking about how to seek out a counselor and what to consider when you're in counseling.
Thank you so much for that. So we have 4 minutes left. We're wrapping up now. I want to make sure that we remember, friends out there, let me sit before I do this, because I don't want to do like the full wrap up and you're like, actually, Kim, I have something else to say. So any closing thoughts, quotes, shout outs, 16 bars that either one of you wants to drop in here before I kind of put a neat little bow on this? Go ahead, Dr. Ortiz.
I actually have to work on a speech for something. I got that women of achievement thing for the Y, and I got to do a speech, right? And so one of the quotes, one of the people that I really like, and that, it kind of sings to me, kind of, during this time of COVID, all the deaths that are going on, and then the protests and etc. And just so much going on. You wonder whether, how do you deal with it? Where are you in this, etc. So there's this lady, Dr. Clarissa. I don't know if you guys have heard of her, Dr. Clarissa Estes. She was an activist, but way back. I think she's still alive, but she might be in her 80s, 70s. Native American and Latina together, working in Wisconsin or something. It was really, so she had a poem that she made. It's a very long one, so I'm just going to say the first sentence, but I'm sure you've all heard it. We were made for times like these. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about why is this happening, or what is going on with me, it's you're here, you have to think you're here for a reason. You're doing what you're doing for a reason. You were made for times like these. You can do this. You can, you can make your way through this. You have a purpose. So.
And that, friends out there, came from pediatrician / one-time single mom / corner from the Boogie Down Bronx. Did I get that right?
Yes, I'm from the South Bronx.
South Bronx.
I like my t-shirt too. I got this neat t-shirt. I was created in the Bronx. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Boom. Corner from the Bronx has spoken.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presence here, Elizabeth Joy. Final words for us?
I'll keep it short. First of all, thank you all of you helpers out there. Thanks for all that you do. But please take care of yourselves. We are better in helping our community and our clients and our babies and all the people we care about when we take care of ourselves. I want to read a quote from Oprah Winfrey that I've brought up in our support group multiple times to close out as a reminder. Challenges are gifts that force us to search for a new center of gravity. Don't fight them. Just find a new way to stand.
Love it.
So I want to encourage everyone to lean into the challenges that we're facing, and rather than resist it, find a new way to stand. And that's interpersonally and that's externally. But healing is real. I live it every day. And so for those of you who want it for yourself, just know that you can have it. Please visit our website. We have lots of services. We got programming coming up. We got stuff for y'all. So please come see us so that we can feed you so you can keep feeding the people.
That's right. We have a survey that's been shared on our social media outlets, so you should be able to see that. Please fill out the event survey so that we know how to best prepare for the next right thing that we do for you. We're here to serve and support, and not as self-care, like we're doing the work.
Yes.
Friends, we're doing the work so that we can show up and have the ability to pour into you. So we've got support groups, as Elizabeth mentioned. We have a men's support group on Mondays. We have a support group on Tuesdays at noon for Black organizers. We have a support group on Tuesday evenings. Hey, there it is, for a general support group for Black helpers on Tuesday evenings at 6 o'clock. And then next week, we're actually going to be introducing a learning community that we have for Black helpers. And then you'll see on the top there the different kinds of helpers that we are talking about. But this learning community is going to be for us to take a deeper dive into what's going on with you. What is your story? And then how do you customize your pathway to being well by understanding who you are, taking time to just sit in your own space, your own identity, to love you, to invest in yourself, and to be well. So we want to thank our partners for this. We want to thank you so much to Dr. I'm sorry.
One more piece that's coming out. We are going to launch a healing cohort that I will be taking people through the 6-stage healing that's in my book that I referred to this evening. We don't have the date set yet, so please express interest if you're interested in doing that. Especially, I think we may run out of space in those cohorts that we just mentioned on the learning community. So that's another piece that we have coming up. So make sure you do that as well.
That's right. I think last week
the survey for a chance to win. We have 4 $50 gift cards for those who complete the surveys. You're going to be entered for a chance to win a $50 gift card. So please do that.
And I have been told that I can't enter to win.
So. No. But thank you all. Thanks to our partner. Thank you for ADAMH, Dr. Dixon, and for, first of all, bringing our group together, for supporting us, for mentoring us, and then for funding this whole project. Shout out to Dr. Dixon and ADAMH. We appreciate you. Freedom Block, African American Wellness Walk, Columbus Urban League. There are so many we've been in conversation with. Of course, Dr. Ortiz, Kim Braswell. Thank you, Margot, behind the scenes, Sharonda, Ernest, Tiandra, all of our original members, Ephraim. We love you. We love all of you, and we want you to take care of yourselves. Until next time, please be well. Self-care is an act of resistance.
It sure is. Can I put one more affirmation into the space before we shut down?
Mm-hmm.
It's Juneteenth this weekend, family.
Yes, some of that.
Juneteenth is when Black people in the United States were truly liberated. I want you to sit inside of this particular Juneteenth and really do something for yourself that reminds you that you are a free sovereign being.
Mm-hmm.
In the Ubuntu call and response, there's a couple lines that I wanted you to remember. One of the lines says, one of the affirmations there says that we are the hope and the dream of the enslaved. We are the hope and the dream of the enslaved. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Let's live up to that. Let's know that when you show up in a space, you show up with your ancestors' eyes, their hands, their bodies. Embody that. Get well, be free, be sovereign. Seek relentlessly your healing and be whole, healthy, healed, and whole. There's a way to do it. Black community ambassadors are here to support you. Please check us out. Follow us on social media platforms. Fill out that survey. If you get that gift card, holler at me. I'm hungry. You know what I'm saying? Take me get something to eat. I don't know. And we appreciate you more than you know. More than you know. Love on yourselves. Love each other.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.